Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today to our first of 3 sessions of critical conversations in LIS at the School of Information Science at the University of South Carolina. My name is Nicole Cook. I am the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair at the University of South Carolina, and I'm so pleased to be able to bring these conversations to the LIS community. So today we're very fortunate and very excited to have Cindy Hohl with us. Cindy is the current American Library Association president. And so we've had really just a great opportunity to have ALA presidents for the past couple of years come and talk to our community. And today is no different. And so Cindy will join us just in a few seconds. And we're going to have hopefully a good conversation. There's so much to talk about in library land now. I think maybe things maybe even too exciting for us and everything that's happening. So Cindy, welcome. And I'm so glad to be in conversation with you today.
You, Dr. Cook, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm grateful to the University of South Carolina for hosting the Augusta Baker Lecture Series.
Absolutely. So maybe let's get started talking a little bit about your presidency. You've been in office not quite a year, and certainly there's been a lot going on, a lot that's required your attention. So can you tell us a little bit about how things have been going and what's captured your attention and what's on your agenda as we move forward?
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to introduce myself. Hanmi Takiapi. That means greetings, relatives. Damakota Isan Te Midwangtan Dakota. I'm Dakota of the Santee Sioux Nation. Badewakpa Niobrara, Nebraska. Our village is in Niobrara, Nebraska. Wawihake Robert and Janice Clancy. I'm the youngest daughter of Robert and Janice. Watakoja Lyle and Philomene Henry. I'm the granddaughter of Lyle and Philomene. Waina, Charlotte Olivia Nina. I'm the mother of Charlotte Olivia and Nina on Petuwash Day. In Dakota, I greet you in a good way today as we gather here. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So it's so important in our Dakota ways when we gather either in person or in line, we always set the expectation of gathering in a good way together as one. And that means that no matter what we discuss here today, it's going to be received in the best way possible. We're going to be able to be in this safe space together, asking questions, sharing information, and learning and growing together. It's so important that as we continue to strengthen one another, that we remember our humanness and that we lean into humanity, especially during these times of talking about all of the critical issues that are happening in libraries and the information science field. So I wanted to start this in a good way with you and to remind all of our information warriors that this is the time for us to rise up. And as we continue to look to all of the leaders in our field, this is a time for us to show up for libraries, to stand for one another, and to be as collective in our action as possible. And that means that we don't leave anyone behind. I introduced my people in our village in central Nebraska, and I come from a very small community. And when I think about our small and rural communities, our libraries there have an equal need to access information. Our libraries are also community hubs for information. And as ALA president, it has been an honor to be able to represent our small and rural communities as well, especially being from the Midwest. It's important that we talk about who we are as a people. And so I always encourage everyone to remember who you are. That's why I bring up who my parents are, my grandparents, who I'm the parent to, my children. Because as I work in a good way, I always want to make sure that I'm making decisions, thinking about the impact of those decisions onto the people that I serve, whether that is my family, my friends, my colleagues. And I encourage you all to do the very same. When you come to your work every day, I hope that you have a full heart and that you're here bringing your knowledge, strengths, skills, and abilities to show up in the best way possible. It's times like these where we can just take this one step at a time. And while it may sound insurmountable, all of the issues and challenges that we face. The key is facing it together as one. And so in Dakota, we also say mitaku iwase, and that means that we are all related. And if we held that value as a community, as Americans, we would be able to make decisions in a way that helps us not move too quickly, but to remember the impact of the people and all that is living, because that's where true sustainability lies. It's not only in knowing your history, but it's in the memory work. It's in remembering why you're here, and that the Creator put us all here with a purpose and for a reason. Dr. Cook, I continue to ask myself, why am I serving as ALA president at this moment in this time? And I believe I have like 95 days to go or something before my term is over. And I don't have those answers yet. That has not been revealed to me. So all I can do is show up every day to do the best that I can and to face each day, working along my colleagues and my friends to see how we can help everyone stand up against misinformation, stand up against attempted censorship, stand up against silencing of voices. Because there was a time in this country, a mere 100 years ago, when it was very real for my people, the Native people, to not even have citizenship. We were born here on these lands. The Creator put us here for a reason. We protect these lands. We conserve our natural resources. We know best how to help everyone have enough for our people. Yet there was a time in this country when we were not considered citizens, and that was a way to oppress us, to keep us down, to silence our voices so that we could not vote. When my grandparents were born in 1919, in our village, Osanti, they weren't considered American citizens until the Indian Citizenship Act, and they turned 5 years old. That was also the year that they were removed from our families and placed in boarding school. They called it residential boarding school, but I don't call that a residence, especially when you look at the harmful and traumatic impact of those days, where these schools to this day still have cemeteries where the students who never came home lay and rest. To me, that shouldn't have ever been a residential setting. That boarding school shouldn't have been a place that really became a prison. And so it's important that as information professionals, we understand this. We understand the history so that we can also find strength in the memory. Because there are many of us who carry this in our hearts, and we do to this day. And in this field, a lot of this work around Indigenous librarianship, it doesn't always get elevated. So I'm so grateful for this webinar series to include the Indigenous perspective. Because as we continue to work together, sometimes it takes the ALA president to elevate the needs of an information field that sometimes has been marginalized. When I joined this field, I was called a 1%er. And I said, what is that? What does that mean? And they said, well, there's only 1% of Indigenous librarians. And I said, okay, well, that's a good statistic. I don't know that that really includes the impact of everyone who works here or who even identifies. I said, I'm not sure, when that study happened, but, maybe we'll see that shift. When you hear that, what you're hearing is someone othering you. And I always want everyone to raise up together to help them see that we belong in libraries. We belong in this space working together, and that everyone is welcome here. I hope that that has been a clear and sound message in my time serving as ALA president. Because in times like that, when you hear those kinds of comments, that's when you need to protect your spirit. That's when you need to remember that not every comment or question is being given to you in a good way. That sometimes people find power in othering others, in othering everyone. And that's never the role of the librarian. The librarian is here to be a trusted information professional. And that means if you don't know something about someone, You listen because the Creator gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So maybe we need to listen more than we speak in those moments. And those are a lot of Dakota values that I share. And I share that in a good way. And I hope that everyone here today, every day, brings with them Wobadehicha. And that means your positive spirit, your strength from within. Because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. And sometimes you just need to live in the moment and you need to look at this hour by hour. And you need to remember, okay, we have this work that we're focused on. This is the project at hand. This is the paper we're writing. This is the webinar we're going to present or attend. And we need to make sure that we're scheduling time for ourselves as well. Because the foundations of humanity will always include all of us. So in my work as ALA president, I've had an opportunity to tour with libraries all across the country. Everywhere anyone has ever provided me an invitation, I've done my best to be there, to support them in their work, to hear about their experiences, to tour their beautiful library spaces. And in doing so, I bring my Dakota values with me because no matter where I go in this world, I'm always Dakota. No matter how I lead, how I work, how I show up, I don't forget the teachings. And I'll share some of that today as we're speaking together. But the first thing is I was always raised to understand Moshida, and that's humility. And no one person is ever higher than the other. So even in my service as ALA president, I have wanted that message to be loud and clear, that we are one together and that we stand side by side. We sit side by side. We're here with one voice. So whether it's a webinar, my column in American Libraries magazine, I've always wanted to be able to infuse a little bit of our indigeneity. And in doing so, that includes us. I've had some people say to me, you only care about Native Americans. You only write about Indigenous peoples. And I say, thank you for that feedback. I hear your message, but I want you to consider something else. We've always been here since time immemorial. We will always be here. These are the lands the Creator put us on, including us, centering who I am as a human being. Everyone has that right. And so just because I'm including a small percentage of people that we haven't always talked about or highlighted, that doesn't mean that that excludes anyone. And so I found that interesting and most curious. But we're living in some strange times. We're living in times where the library is under attack. We can't attack each other in those times. We can't think about what other stressors are going to be introduced when we're battling the highest level of attempted censorship, when we're battling misinformation every time we turn around. What we need to do as people is to protect our youth in these times because they're the most vulnerable and they have a lot of access to information at their fingertips. And I don't hear us talking about that enough. When you hear that there's these organized groups that are coming for libraries and saying you're wrong, you're terrible people, you open these doors every day and there's books on shelves that could bring harm to people, that's one school of thought. But I always want to remind my colleagues to rise up in those times and to advocate for our profession and to raise your voice. And for me, I have no problem sharing. I'm a parent. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a voter. I'm a constituent. You know, whenever someone wants to push back on our profession and question why we do the work that we do, for some of us, it's a calling. For some of us, it's a profession. For some of us, it's a means of income. However someone works in libraries, I hope that if they continue to work in libraries, that they bring that inner strength to this work, because there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be that negativity. And in this climate, when we're hearing that everything is wasteful. I want everyone to remember who you are, because humanity is never wasted. So I'm looking forward to our Q&A. I know that my approach is a little bit different, but I want to share a little bit of my heart so that everyone hears the message that hopefully they're here to hear today.
Thank you so much for that. And in particular, your beautiful introduction of yourself and your family and your community. And I think it's a wonderful reminder to kind of center ourselves. I think everyone on the call, and you certainly know, everything is so quick and everything is so fast paced. We just kind of come in, and sometimes we forget to just take that breath and center and remind ourselves to really be present for whatever's going on. And there were so many things that you said. One in particular was that every question or comment doesn't necessarily deserve our time and attention, especially when we know that these questions or comments are not delivered in good faith. The second thing that I really wanted to highlight is you being called a one percenter. And what that really means. And sometimes, when I'm speaking or talking to students, sometimes it feels like the call is coming from inside the house, in the sense that there's a lot of, lack of diversity for one, but just, I don't know that we're always on the same page as a profession, right? When it comes to what we value, what we put out there, and just the sheer idea that people are saying to you that you are not centering them in your columns in American libraries. It says a lot. It says things that we probably don't want to hear, but continue to need to be addressed. So I guess what I would say, what I would ask, what's on my heart for today is, how do we continue to show up, and how do we continue not to self-censor? You mentioned censorship in the beginning, but I think that there's also a lot of censorship going on in our libraries, in our profession, because people are fearful and they're overwhelmed. They're not sure, what to do next, and with good reason. So I guess my question would be, how do we address the outside when there's still a lot that needs to be addressed on the inside? If that question makes sense.
Absolutely, that's a great question. And the other value is wanchita, and that's compassion. We need to have compassion for ourselves before we just are ready to pour into other cups. And I see that a lot in this field. I see that we're so eager to serve, so eager to give, to support, to help, because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel good to be helpers. And for some of us, we feel like, that's the Creator put us here to do, to serve in a good way, to be the best person we can be. But we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anyone else. And that's so important for librarians, for caregivers, for anyone who works with the public, really. When we hear that people have information needs, they come to the library because we're that trusted community hub of information. This is a trusted profession. It doesn't matter what anyone else says when they're trying to start this campaign of hate. And that's what it is. We need to set that aside and remember who we are. We lean into our warriorship as human beings. We remember that we have wisdom to share, and that they come to us because we're trusted. We're here to represent those who don't live with courage. And there's a lot of that. If you were brought up in a society, in a culture of respect, then that's what you carry with you. Even when you're faced with adversity, you remember to show the respect that sometimes someone doesn't give to you. But as librarians, as information professionals, we can still, in that moment, ask for grace from one another. We can still try to meet everyone where they're at. We can still show that respect that perhaps we haven't been shown, but we can always do it with a firmness and putting up Those soft barriers is what I call. I will put up a soft barrier if I feel someone has been disrespectful towards me. And then I set the expectation. I help them understand how to be successful in communicating with me because that's the goal. In that moment, yes, I want to be helpful, but I want to make sure that I understand that you're seeing me as a human. Because if someone can't see you as a human, how can you possibly meet them where they're at? And it's so important that in those moments, sometimes you lean into your biggest strength, and that's silence. In our Dakota ways, we learn silence very young. As children, we're always to be listening to our elders and to leaning into that environment and knowing our place in this world. And we know that with silence comes peace. With silence comes fortitude. And with that together, that's where you build resilience so that you can stand up. I'm not saying it's always easy to do that, though. I know what it's like to work on the front lines at a customer service desk and someone is upset over something. They don't have money to pay for a copy. They need to use the phone to get a ride. Little things to us sometimes are big things to people who need that help. And so when you look at the policies of any institution, is it centering the people? Because the day we work in libraries that center policy over people is the day when we aren't supported to be the library workers we're called to be. And so it's really hard in those moments when someone is having a human moment and they just need help. They need to use the phone, but you hear someone saying, no, it's against the policy. Well, we need to find a solution in that moment because that's when escalations happen. And so when we talk about de-escalation training, we always focus on the behavior. We always focus on how to provide solutions. Well, sometimes that means that we need to have a gray area. And so I know that's hard to hear for some organizational minds who love policy and black and white, but sometimes we need to be able to meet people where they're at. And that means that we're going to give ourselves grace and we're going to go ahead and say, you know what? I think we can do better. I think we can help you. I think we can, turn this around and hopefully they'll have a good library experience.
So well said. Thank you. So before I ask the next question, I just want to let our audience members know that you have the opportunity to ask questions of Cindy. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we will get to them shortly. So maybe diving back into some of the real life things that we're battling right now in our profession. Our profession has, I think, always been targeted in certain ways. It feels particularly acute right now and perhaps particularly bleak right now. And I've, heard from, my fellow library faculty members on down to library school students about what does the future hold for us in the information profession? Will there be libraries to work in? So I just want to solicit your opinion on that. In particular, we're explicitly talking about the executive order against the Institute of Museum and Library Services, otherwise known as IMLS, which I think so many of us have benefited from over the years. I myself would not have earned a PhD without IMLS, in conjunction with ALA. And what does that look like? We've seen such a great swell of support online, but what does it look like in your day-to-day, not only as ALA president, but as a practicing library professional?
Again, I love that question. And I'm going to answer that in a story wheel again. So March is Women's History Month. And we look at all of the strong female leaders in your mind and in your field. We have Augusta Baker, who went down this path to find her way, to earn her education, to understand what it meant to follow a passion, to be able to represent to be a first, but never the last, to be the ultimate leader, so that now we have Dr. Nicole Cook, who's also here and representing in the best way in this field. In my community, I look to Chief Wilma Mankiller. We do have female chiefs. We do have tribes where women are leaders. We look at Joy Harjo and all of the beautiful work that she continues to provide. All of that work is housed in our libraries. For decades, these women have had such impactful memories and moments that have been woven throughout this field. And it's important that as we continue to think about what tomorrow brings, we lean into the memories of who came before us, because every day of our service is honoring them and is supporting their vision. Because without them, we might not be here. And I'm talking specifically about women of color. If we didn't have those leaders who came and did the work and were brave enough to be the first, we might not have benefited from that path, because there wouldn't have been an example of what it looked like to be a woman of color, a leader in this field. So whenever I look to the future, I always have to reflect on the past first. When you think 5 years ago, we were in a fight for our lives, literally. We were subjected to the COVID pandemic. And even then, and especially then, we were surrounded by misinformation that cost people their lives. Here we are 5 years later, once again, in a different capacity, but dare I say, in the fight for our lives to keep our library access free and open for all. Misinformation still shrouded behind every intentional lie. And that is something that is so important for us to remember, because the day we start believing those lies is the day that they can become the truth. And no one has time for that. So when we hear that there's an executive order, a new play in the playbook, a new way to cut Americans off from their freedoms, an unconstitutional action, actually, that tells Americans, we believe you deserve less, and you're welcome. We can't stand for that. We can't allow that to happen. So when we hear that the Institute of Museum and Library Services is in jeopardy, when we hear that the goal is to eliminate this federal agency altogether, that's a time for great pause. No, I don't say that that's a time for 5-alarm fires. I understand that that's been said. To me, a fire alarm induces panic. When you're faced with a time that is challenging, I always lean into my Dakota values, our strength, our generosity of spirit. And to keep us honest, we pause, because we remember we can't leave anyone behind in this moment. We're going to come together with the best minds possible, and we're going to make good decisions for everyone. So as Americans working in this field, while we may feel like this is a huge threat and a huge attack against our libraries, this is a time for us to come together, to share the importance of the library, to expose the values of this field so that everyone understands. Don't take libraries for granted, and don't let libraries wither away, because that's exactly the moment that we're in. So while my approach may be one that is more calm, that does not mean that I'm not taking action and that I'm not supporting the delivery of a lot of messaging. But I do so in a way that makes sure that I'm not leaving anyone behind in that moment. Because as leaders, it's so important that we remember that we have to be intentional in our messaging.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we've got quite a few questions for you from the audience. I'm so glad to see them. So first question is, and I think you've addressed some of this already, how is the ALA actively supporting libraries and library professionals in politically charged environments, especially considering the rising censorship, book bans, and threats to intellectual freedom that disproportionately affect marginalized communities? The questioner goes on to say, in light of increasing political unrest, what additional steps is the ALA taking to ensure that DEI principles are not just a matter of policy, but also embedded in practice at every level of the association and within libraries across the nation? And then the third part is, and again, related to the political climate, given the current climate of political polarization, what specific resources or initiatives is the ALA providing to empower libraries to continue advocating for social justice and inclusive education? And how are you measuring the impact of these efforts in real time? So a lot happening here, but all very important questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for those questions. With 125,000 libraries in this country, there are so many ways that we go about this work in our own unique setting based on the institution and the information needs of the community that it serves. So ALA is here to absolutely support library workers, library systems, and I would always encourage people to join ALA if they're not a member. As we continue to see these attacks on libraries, we've seen membership decline. And to me, that doesn't make sense. That's the time when you rise up. That's the time when warriors show up together. And so, for anyone who is confused about what they've heard, and I've had people say to me, I can't be a member of ALA. In my state, you know, there's legislation that says that we aren't going to be ALA members. And so, I want to remind everyone that as Americans, we have our freedoms. We're private citizens. We're able to join any association that we want to. And for me, I've always considered my membership in ALA to be an investment in my career. I do the work. I don't rely on anyone else to do it for me. And as a one percenter, I guess that just shows that sometimes there can still be 1,000% behind just one. So ALA is always here to help people with their work, with our standards, with helping everyone access information. And a lot of that information is on the website, which has been newly updated. And so I encourage anyone, if they are interacting with the web page that has a broken link, to please report that so that the information can be accurate. But it's so important that as we look to the needs from our members, that ALA members are being explicit in their requests so that we know how to meet those needs as well. When we have bodies of work that have been organized for even decades within ALA, a lot of that is housed on the website in different areas, or you may find it under your division, roundtable, or chapter. If there are information needs that are not being met, it's important that ALA is made aware of that. And I will bring up one of my initiatives, and that's the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and People Toolkit. So this is an epidemic in this country. And for those who are not familiar, there are thousands of Native Americans who have never returned home to their families. And so I always preface this that this is a misinformation conundrum. This is actual disinformation when we see that the national database doesn't include entries for all of the Native Americans who are missing. That's intentional. When we hear that this is a health epidemic, but that's not being reported on the national news, that should be alarming to anyone. When we hear that this is a data disparity, because again, not in all of the information tools do we have, is this data accurate? It's important that as information professionals, we have access to information tools such as this toolkit. And we're developing this toolkit to be a companion guide to the Trails Manual, which is housed under the Rural Native Tribal Libraries of All Kinds Committee. So whenever we have an information need, it's important that ALA knows so that we can help develop that set of resources. When we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we look at the core values of ALA, which is, access, equity, intellectual freedom, privacy, the public good, and sustainability. It used to actually state diversity, and that was changed this past year. And when I asked why, I was told, well, because diversity is in everything that we do. Diversity is in all of these core values. But is it? That's a question that members need to ask themselves. Everyone needs to understand the process of making changes within ALA, and that's through the council. So if you don't have a relationship with your counselor, I hope you reach out to them and remind them that as they represent you and your information needs, that they're bringing that information and they're helping your area of librarianship continue to be seen and heard. When ALA rises to the challenge, they're currently focused primarily on IMLS, on making sure that we have the information out there, that everyone understands how to contact their Congress representatives, and that we are providing everyone with information online. We had a town hall meeting this morning, and that was recorded. So if anyone missed it, they'll be able to watch it later. And that's providing an overview of everything that the Washington, D.C. office is working on right now. Our lobbyists in Washington, D.C. have been working around the clock ever since this executive order went live. As we continue to look to the matter at hand, it's also important that everyone knows where to find information for National Library Week. That's coming up. And so all of that information is on our websites. Like I said, I think I have 95 days left. To serve as ALA president for 1 year, you're inundated and immersed in all of this information. And it seems like just when you're finally gaining momentum, your time's up. And so that's really challenging for a leader because, of course, you wish them well, but your focuses and initiatives are no longer top of mind. And dare I say, I'm not entirely sure mine ever were. I have not received the support that I was told I would. And I keep on calling it DIY president because literally everything I do is on my own. So as you forge your path forward, I hope that you'll continue to ask those questions of ALA if you're needing something specific. And for those of you who are in states that continually are getting hit with legislation over and over, reach out to the Office of Intellectual Freedom if you have not done so. Reach out to our Public Policy and Advocacy Department if you have not done so. Both of those departments are there to serve you and to help you gain access to the representation you need, the tools that you need, and they have an abundance of resources available. So I hope that answers those questions.
Thank you for that. And I just want to really highlight and thank you for your candor and your honesty. I have served on a presidential committee in the past, and what Cindy says is 100% true. I would dare say, as Cindy said earlier, particularly for the presidents of color, that this issue of support is very real. And so, if Cindy is asking a question such as this and not getting an answer, we'll say, it's not a good thing, but, she's in good company. So not only do I want to thank Cindy for her honesty and her candor and her leadership, but since we're talking about IMLS, I do want to shout out Cindy Sturgis-Landrum and Laura Herta, who are the deputy directors of IMLS, and they are fighting for us as a profession every day, even when they don't know if they're going to have a job tomorrow. So I want to thank you for that. This leadership is not easy by any stretch. So we have a question from Lee Ramey, and Lee is asking, What are the main issues that tribal libraries are facing today in your community or around the country?
Well, tribal communities are sovereign nations, and some people aren't aware of that. And so there's a relationship with the federal government, a trust responsibility that isn't always upheld. And so when a tribal community has a limited access to resources, the library itself, could perhaps not have access to the internet, or they might not be able to afford electronic resources. Um, and so I really appreciate that question because I also want to highlight something that was not well known. And for several years, um, state library agencies that received funding from IMLS to allocate to all libraries in their state did not always share those funds with tribal libraries because they could say a tribal library doesn't meet the federal definition of a public library. Well, that's not true. And so we worked for a few years on that, and we finally got the definition of that changed. So now tribal libraries are supposed to be eligible to receive that funding support through the state library agency, funneled down through the IMLS. So it's interesting that that happened for so long and no one really ever took action about that. So that's one of the things when I heard about that, I said, well, that's not right. And so, advocating for the needs of tribal communities is something that we can all do. And everyone's welcome to work in tribal libraries. There are plenty non-Indigenous librarians who work in tribal libraries. And so it's so important that people remember that there's also hundreds. This isn't like just a handful. There's hundreds of tribal libraries, both public and school. And so just because a tribal library was defined as a library for the tribe, that didn't mean that they weren't the public. And so I hope that that's helpful information because there's always been those layers of oppression over us. And when we're striving to provide equal access to healthcare, to nutrition, to housing and education, librarianship's very important, but sometimes the tribe doesn't have enough money to even have a library.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you. So our next question, with the potential reduction, possible elimination of IMLS funding, what alternative grant opportunities in the ALA, or excuse me, is the ALA exploring to ensure that libraries, especially those in underserved communities, can continue to support DEI initiatives and critical services for their patrons? Second part to that is, as libraries face financial uncertainty with the possible disappearance of IMLS, pretty much the same question. What innovative funding strategies is the ALA recommending to ensure that DEI-related programs and services remain accessible to all communities, regardless of political climate or shifting priorities at the federal level?
Yes, so ALE has a webpage with information about, scholarship opportunities, about grant programs, and some of those are private gifts that are unrestricted and that ALA can use for, whatever programs they deem necessary to support at that time. So everyone's asking this question right now, as changes with federal granting is now under jeopardy. A lot of different institutions and other fields are going to be asking, what funding sources are available. So this is definitely a tricky time, but I do know that our interim executive director, Leslie Berger, continues to have meetings with funders to help them see what the current needs are in libraries in the information science field. So I'm very hopeful that we will continue to receive the support that we need. We announced 2 months ago that we received a $25 million gift from a private funder who was a library board trustee. And he wants that to go to scholarships because he believes in the power of libraries and supporting librarianship. So I continue to be hopeful that there will be large gifts that are coming. But of course, we can't announce anything until it has happened.
Sure. Okay, we have a question from Lauren. Lauren says, how do we keep the spirit of truth and sharing of information alive in a political environment which seeks to limit our speech?
Like I said, you need to remember who you represent. You need to remember who you are, and you need to focus on that message being delivered in the best way. And so sometimes that does feel challenging and it does feel like you need to be brave. But I ask you to take courage in those moments. I ask you to stand up for your values, that you lean into your integrity, and that you let your character shine. As librarians, as information professionals, we are trusted in our communities. Don't let anyone tear you down and try to tell you different, because that is not true. We know what the truth is. And even if it's uncomfortable for people to hear, we always need to share it because that is delivering in a good way. That's leading in a good way. And that's helping people hold each other accountable instead of pointing fingers and saying, look, there's the bad guy. Because for every bad guy was 1,000 silent voices who let the bad guy do what the bad guy wanted to do.
Mhm. For sure. We have a question from Dr. Lorraine Roy, past ALA president. So Dr. Roy says the Library of Congress Literacy Awards program is continuing. This program provides cash awards to programs that support literacy in many forms. Check it out. Last year was the first year that awards were given to programs that supported Indigenous language revitalization. So more of an addendum to the previous question. Thank you, Dr. Roy. All right, we have a question from John. And John says, for small and rural libraries where the stakes are so high, as the needs are so high, yet some of the non-supporters are so adamant, what's the best way to overcome the walls we will face? They will not want to compromise or listen, and any suggestions are welcome.
Yeah, that's a great conundrum once again for us to explore together because when I think about the village that I grew up in, I can say, well, I'm related to almost everyone. They're all my cousins and my family. And so, you know how to talk to people when you have a long history with them in a small area. And it's important that we remember that during these times, we can have community meetings and bring people together and remind them what the power of the library is, how we help people with telehealth appointments. We help people apply for jobs and benefits online, that we help people print off their tax forms every year, that we help people with literacy-based programs, with tutoring in some areas, with test proctoring, all of the different resources that are available, the programs, the services, the materials. We need to help everyone understand what the role of the library is in your community. And it looks different in every community. So as we're building relationships, sometimes that means we need to call an open meeting. We need to help people see the value of the shared community asset. And we need to talk about reinvestment of these community funds because that's what it is. Communities are reinvesting into their neighbors. And while every neighbor should have equal access to the internet, that should be as a human right, along with any other utility. We know that in small and rural areas, especially where resources are sometimes limited, if people have to make a decision whether they can pay their utilities or the water bill or have internet, the internet's not going to win that argument. So it's important that we help everyone see that there is a great value to supporting the local library and that it does have something for everyone, whether they want to interact with the library or not, that is going to be available and a part of the community fabric.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is from Gavin. Gavin says, we've seen increasing harassment and threats of librarians, particularly those who are standing up for diversity in these last 3 to 4 years. How can we balance protecting ourselves with the need to assure our patrons can access diverse collections? How can we best help, protect, and support each other when our fellow librarians are facing harassment?
Thank you, Gavin. As one of those librarians that have been targeted and attacked, I've had to close 2 social media accounts for receiving the threatening messages, the only good Indian's a dead Indian. And when I reported that, I was told, well, just block them. Well, I don't know if these people are going to be waiting for me at my next talk. I don't know if they're going to actually make good on their threats. And it is taxing. It is hard to be a woman of color in this field, in this country at this time. And so, as I shared at the beginning, Wobidechia, you got to remember your positive inner strength. That's what you bring with you no matter where you go. And you know who you are. And sometimes that's the only information you have to go on. But you know, I'm going to walk in that door. I'm going to go and do the work today. I'm going to go and give this keynote. I'm going to show up in the best way possible. And sometimes you don't have that support from your colleagues. Sometimes there are people who live in a very different reality than you do. Sometimes they're not even cognizant of the layers of privilege that have been provided to them, perhaps for generations. And that's okay. I don't say that to divide us. I say that to recognize the difference, because that's what diversity is. It's recognizing the differences so that we can take stock in our strengths. Just because I grew up in a small reservation doesn't mean that I'm someone who carries that with me wherever I go. Like, oh, I'm only supposed to be a small reservation girl. I'm not supposed to leave my community. I'm not supposed to do bigger things because I wasn't intended to be in those spaces. So again, that bravery, it has to come from somewhere. And I know that not everyone has that. So it's important that allies recognize that what we deal with and what we shoulder, it happens every day in America. And whether you live in a community where you're cognizant of that or not, it happens online. It happens in the grocery store. It happens no matter where you go. It can happen to you and at you in your place of employment. And sometimes your manager decides that that's not something that they want to handle today or ever. And then once again, you feel isolated and alone. I wish I had a blueprint. I wish that I could give with definitive certainty that this is what we need to do to show up for each other. But we've had a lot of strong leaders, wise elders who've walked on and who have left us now. And we're still here trying to figure it out. So I think that as soon as we can recognize the humanity among us, between us, and within us, that's what's going to help us move forward. But until then, it's been all too convenient to go ahead and fill your cup without thinking if anyone has any left in theirs.
So powerful. Thank you. Cindy, Dr. Roy shares in the chat that she had similar experiences when she was president. We had a question.
Yeah. Dr. Roy, thank you. Pidame Wopita Tanka. Thank you for your service. You know, that's never been lost on me. It's been 18 years now since Dr. Roy took those steps forward and did so in a good way for all librarians, only to be told, you're too different. Your ways are not our ways. Don't tell your stories. Your traditions are not ours. People don't always think about how harmful their messaging can be. But when you walk with your elders always with you, in your mind and your heart, you can remember who you are.
Yeah, I just had to let that sit for a second. We have another question. It says, I've often been dismayed at ALA and honestly felt it can be elitist. There are often silos. It often feels like it's all about who you know. I've experienced negative reactions when I've told others that I work in a South Carolina library. As a white male, I can only imagine how other non-white library workers feel. I'm so sorry to hear about your experiences, but not surprised. What ways do you suggest that we as ALA members advocate for change?
It's important that we listen like we're doing today. It's important that we trust the information that we hear, especially when it's a personal experience. I have no reason to share otherwise. And I only do so when I'm in a safe space. when I'm in a setting where I feel like we're gathered in a good way. Otherwise, I keep those barriers up. I'm married to a white man who's a librarian, and he brought me into this field. When I met him, he was going to go to library school, and I said, "What's that?" I worked in casino marketing, and we were together for 10 years before he recruited me to libraries. But his mom was a school librarian, and so he loved volunteering in the library, and he always knew what he wanted to do. But it wasn't until he was in the field for 10 years when he recruited me to join him in the public library. And I would come home and I would tell him the things that people were saying to me. And I would tell him the things that I see. And he was oblivious to that. And I share that in a good way because we always have things to learn about the world around us. But if you don't have those experiences and you're not cognizant of how your colleagues are being treated, sometimes you can't be the ally that maybe you want to be. So if we don't listen, if we don't ask, we'll never know. But you have to create that safe space first. And I would always tell him, I don't say this to burden you. I just want you to know that this is going on. Or did you know that this person always talks down to women of color? Did you know that this one always tells parents that they have to stand in line and sign up? And then they just let other people go into the program. It's just little things that sometimes, again, become big things. And it has an impact because that's the library experience that that person takes with them. And so it's so important that as we're working together in a good way, we remember, well, we always have something to learn about each other. What we can do is bring our genuine, authentic selves and not allow anyone else to question what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, folks, we are almost at time, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out and for such thoughtful questions and engagement. And again, kudos to you, Cindy, and we're so grateful not only for your time and expertise, but coming and being willing to have a presentation, or excuse me, a conversation instead of a presentation. And we're so grateful for your candor, your energy, and just the work that you do on our behalf. And I, for one, am rooting for you in your next 95 days, and very grateful for what you have brought to our profession and the advocacy that you encourage us to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cook. I'm so grateful to be here today. I appreciate the invitation. And I'm always here to work with all of you in a good way. So please feel free to reach out anytime, cindyforlibraries@gmail.com. And my path on this journey might be 95 days, but I still have 25 years of librarianship to go. So I'm going to be here for a while.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to our audience. And please join us again next week, April 3rd. It's April already. And then the following week, April 10th, we have two more very important conversations for this series and critical conversation. We are grateful for your time and your engagement. And until next time, be well.